Our speaker tonight is Alex Schadenberg. He's the founder and the executive director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. The coalition was founded in 1999 to help preserve and enforce legal prohibitions and ethical guidelines prohibiting quote-unquote mercy killing. The coalition seeks to increase public awareness of hospice and palliative care, to develop and build compassionate care community services, and to educate the public on the harm and risks associated with the promotion of euthanasia and assisted suicide. So, without further ado, Alex Schadenberg.
Yeah, the applause is very loud. Now, I'm using a microphone just because of the camera. I thought I'd help him out a bit, make sure that it plays just fine. Now, this is not the Wilberforce weekend, but then this is the presentation I put together for that weekend, and so I thought, it's just as good for you. It's, so that's what we're going to do. The Wilberforce weekend was an event we just put on in Ottawa recently, and it was the whole idea of it was to focus on William Wilberforce and his work that he did in the 18th century to outlaw slavery in the UK, and then end up, of course, worldwide throughout the British Empire, I guess. The fact is that Wilberforce focused on a social change model. So that's what we were looking at that weekend. First thing is I think we have to be focused on what the issue is about, because a lot of people talk about euthanasia, assisted suicide, and they don't understand exactly what they're talking about. I'll give you a prime example. A couple of weeks ago I was in Ottawa and I met with several members of Parliament who were not what I would call typically on our side, and I spoke to them about the issues, and they and the one person in particular just did not understand what the issue was about. They thought it was about turning off life support, and of course it had nothing to do with that. In fact, I was just speaking at King's College a couple of weeks ago, and one of their students who came out said to me, well, what are you going to do about the difficult issues when you have to turn off life support? And I said, well, turning off life support is not euthanasia or assisted suicide. Turning off life support will result in a natural death. It's not about euthanasia or assisted suicide. So what is euthanasia? Well, the other side calls it aid in dying. That's the term they've invented for this. But what it is about is when one person is directly and intentionally involved with ending the life of another person, and usually it's for reasons of mercy. Now we have to understand that this is not then about getting the right to die or things like that. It's about giving a physician, usually it's a physician, not always, the right to directly and intentionally take your life. That's what it's about. So what is assisted suicide then? Well, euthanasia is in section 222 of the Criminal Code, which is the homicide provision. Now homicide is either first degree murder, second degree murder, or manslaughter. And so the euthanasia is dealt in the same way. In the case of assisted suicide, it's section 241 of the Criminal Code. So what is assisted suicide? Well, it's similar to euthanasia, other than it's what one person does to themselves, supposedly. But assisted suicide is when one person is directly and intentionally involved with causing the death of another person. So in the case of assisted suicide, it's usually a physician who writes the prescription for the lethal dose. But we have to understand that where this has become legal, remember, terminology is everything. If people say to you, oh, well, this is assisted suicide, it's not the same as euthanasia because, assisted suicide is what you do to yourself. Euthanasia is when someone would inject you. Assisted suicide is when you take it yourself. But just know, in the jurisdiction of Washington State, they just legalized assisted suicide, and they defined assisted suicide as to ingest. Well, to ingest could be euthanasia, right? If someone mixes it up and feeds it to you because you're not able to do it to yourself, does that not become euthanasia? See, so definitions are everything, right? Euthanasia, assisted suicide, it's not about withholding or withdrawing medical treatment. And I emphasize treatment. Because if you intentionally withhold or withdraw care, basic care, that's a different issue. It's not about the unintentional overdoses. So for instance, I'm going to talk about this again, but for instance, the Quebec College of Physicians has recently come out saying that, well, Canada should legalize euthanasia. And they said that we shouldn't legalize assisted suicide, but we should legalize euthanasia. And they used the example of these difficult cases where a physician uses large doses of painkiller. And they're saying, well, we're already doing this all the time. But really, it's not about the unintentional overdose. Because if I'm trying to kill your pain and you die, that's no different from you being on the table having surgery done to you and you died. The surgeon never intended to kill you. He intended to deal with your medical issue. If you died on the surgeon's table, no one intended to cause your death. Not an intentional death. In the same way as we're intending to kill your pain, if you were to die, there's no intention to kill you. Right? And these are intentional, direct and intentional causes of death. So we have to be very clear about that. So in fact, in Quebec, physicians, in fact, are saying physicians are intentionally abusing the use of pain drugs every day. Therefore, we should legalize this. And that's another issue, isn't it? Because that's exactly what it means, is what they're saying. It's not about, what it is about is it's about the direct and intentional cause of death. So we have to be very clear about what this is. People talk about all these difficult medical situations. Well, we're not opposed to natural death. So what is euthanasia by omission? Well, there is a euthanasia by omission. In Canada, the law is it's a little bit fuzzy with the law, but the issue ethically is quite clear. When you withdraw basic care, so what is basic to the human person, basic care, not treatment, basic care, and with the intention of causing one's death and they die, so usually we're talking about dehydrating someone who's not dying. They're very different from the issues of palliative care when somebody is dying and you have to stop using fluids. You have to stop putting fluids into that body because, of course, the person is dying. They have no need for it. It's very different when we actually intentionally dehydrate someone to death. So I have a picture of Terry Schiavo. The death of Terry Schiavo was very clear. Terry was cognitively disabled. She clearly was probably not going to get better. Now, we don't know that for sure. Everybody saw the recent case of the man in Belgium. 23 years he was considered to be in PBS, and in fact, he never was in PBS. He was misdiagnosed from the beginning. He was someone who was completely paralyzed. So when they were testing him for PBS without using a proper brain scan system, obviously, when you're poking somebody, you're checking for these different things. If you're completely paralyzed, you're not going to be able to react to those things, are you? So this was the issue for him. He was in a locked-in syndrome when he was completely paralyzed. But he was not in PBS. He was completely aware at all times. Anyway, the point is Terry Schiavo, we don't quite know exactly. That was the big issue about Terry Schiavo. The family said we want to care for her. We believe that she's actually not in PBS. Nonetheless, she was not dying. She died of dehydration. So it's very clear. The intention was to dehydrate her to death. She died by dehydration. Very different from, of course, someone who's actually nearing death, who is dying, and the body is shutting down. What results is a natural death. So we need to be very clear. We are opposed to directly and intentionally killing individuals. That's what we're opposed to. Well, we're not opposed to natural death. People say, oh, you guys just want people to stay alive, and oh, you're just vitalists. We're not vitalists. No, we don't believe in killing people. We're not opposed to ending medical treatment, especially medical treatment that lacks benefit, which is overly aggressive, which is burdensome. People say, oh, well, I wouldn't want to have all that medical equipment hooked up to me. I wouldn't want that. Well, you have a right to say no to that. It's not about that. We are opposed, though, to imposing limits of medical care again, not treatment, that is beneficial. I say that very clearly to you because today, with the cost-cutting measures that we're facing in our medical system, a lot of people who have significant disabilities are being told, or their family members are being told, well, we don't know if we're going to provide that basic medical care for you, even though we know that that action is beneficial. But in fact, they're making decisions based on one's quality of life, saying, you don't have a high enough quality of life for us to actually provide that care for you because it's expensive. And that is going on. We're opposed to that.